Morena, it's lovely to be with you for this second day of our synod. Thank you, Trish, for that very, very powerful reminder and challenge. And I think it is definitely something that we should all be actively involved with thinking about and acting on. Let me pray. Loving God, we do pray that as we gather, that all our deliberations will be guided by you. Help us to have ears to hear what you're saying to us afresh today. Amen. As I come to talk and share, yesterday I talked about where we were up to, and hopefully you were encouraged. I thought the wind is in our sails, and yes, we're embarking in change, and it's hard, but the wind is in our sails. This morning I want to talk about going forward, and I want to give us just a few things to have on our radar as we go forward. So yesterday was about where we are now and what we've been up to. Today is about going forward into tomorrow. What I find in my role, and I suppose in all of our roles in this room, in some senses, it's not about telling each other new information. It's just reminding us all and remembering what we actually have been called to do already. And so nothing I say this morning is going to be new to any of us. And actually I think that's partly why it's quite good to be in an apostolic church, in a Episcopal church, because part of that is understanding that as the bishop, then there's a long line of bishops that go all the way back to the first apostles. And part of that tradition reminds us that actually we're not recreating the gospel. We're just passing on the DNA each generation. Now, it lands in a different cultural context, but the gospel is still the gospel. And for 2,000 years, we've proclaimed this gospel. And actually, I had no idea how Jean was going to lead the worship this morning, but her opening lines were about today's a day of resurrection. And last night, in the middle of our ordination service and our Synod Eucharist, we again said we affirmed our faith together by saying we believe he rose from the dead. And that is the faith that we have proclaimed for 2,000 years. That God came and dwelt among us. He died, and normally death is the end of the story. That is it. It's all over. However, in our tradition, he rose again. And that means, therefore, as Jean said this morning, that at that point, a new form of hope enters the human race. That our past does not need to determine our future. Because the resurrection power of God becomes available to his people. So just sometimes God breaks in on human history. Why? Because his son rose again. And we are those transformation people. We are the people who must always remember that we follow a God who rose again, and therefore we're called to be part of that transformation. And that transformation looks different right across our church. That's why it's great to be a broad church. However, it never changes that we are a people who follow a transforming God. That wherever we go in our church, that is the truth. And yesterday, Julia Coleman stood up and reminded us so passionately that Jesus transforms lives and that we tell people about Jesus. I was just on the school pilgrimage just last week, and I was so deeply reminded of Octavius Hadfield coming to the Kapiti Coast and joining in the work of the Māori missionaries who are already there. And within a few years, 5, 6, 7,000 Māori in the Kapiti Coast had accepted a life of Jesus. That's amazing. And that's why we are called Hahi Mihinari, the missionary church. Because when we came to this land, we told people about Jesus. It's outrageous. That's our name. I mean, yes, I know there's five marks, did I say that? No, 5 marks of mission. I know there's 5 marks of mission. I know that. However, my pick is the reason why we're called the missionary church is primarily because in this country, initially, the good news of Jesus was proclaimed and people responded. And we must remember, and Julia standing up yesterday and challenging us with that, so she should. So she should. Because we need to be the people who are constantly calling people into that transformation of Jesus. Here's a challenge for you and for me. I wonder when was the last time we actually shared our faith? We actually talked about Jesus to somebody who didn't know Jesus, not to each other. And I wonder when was the last time, actually I wonder, that somebody came into the fullness of God by us talking to them and God being present in that conversation such that they found a place amongst our faith community. Was it last week? Was it last month? Was it 10 years ago? I was up visiting our St. John's students and I had dinner with Tony Gerritsen. And it just so happened randomly Tony told this story, which I actually had heard before but I'd forgotten. It's very funny. I thought it was funny. Tony said this guy went fishing and he came back from fishing and he caught nothing and his wife sort of said, so how'd you go? He says, I didn't catch any fish, but I influenced a few. Yeah, I built a relationship with a few. That's right. We are the missionary church. God is the transformational God. Jesus rose from the dead. Just sometimes he turns up and wants to transform transform people in the name of God going forward. We're that people. But also God wants to do miraculous healings. I just visited Ratana. They've got a whole room of wheelchairs and crutches and all this kind of stuff. Why? Because God heals. Doesn't always heal. I mean, I've prayed for people. It doesn't always happen. Normally 95% of the time it does for me. No, just joking. Just joking. However, God does heal. God sometimes turns up the most miraculous ways and heals people. And I bet, okay, hands up in this room if you have ever been near or heard somebody testify the fact that God healed somebody. Yep. Okay? We know our God can heal. And going forward, we need to re-engage with this aspect of God. The other day, this will freak a few years out. The other day I had the diocesan exorcists over for dinner. Didn't you even know we had diocesan exorcists? It took me months as the bishop to find out we had them. And I had them over for dinner. I was a little bit scared, I just, like, how are you going to respond, and what are you going to sense in my house and all that kind of stuff, I was a bit paranoid, as you would be. It was a great dinner and there were so many great conversations. But again, there is an element of the transforming work of God that does speak into the spiritual oppression in our world. And I don't know exactly how it works. That's why we have exorcists. I can ask them. But I do know that God speaks into that reality. It was really interesting. Just recently, I was talking to somebody who's a top professional in their field, professional person in their field, top professional person, not a regular churchgoer, not what we'd say is any sense of sort of probably any sense of owning the name of Jesus strongly. And we were just talking about our lives, and I don't know how we even got onto the topic, but I just started, he asked me about some of the things I'm involved with, and every now and then I said, I just said, sometimes, there's situations I'm in where it's just more than what's in the room. There's just another feeling, there's just a vibe that this is just not what's in the room. And I explained a little bit about the spiritual realm, and I explained a little bit about spiritual oppression, how I experienced it. I'm not an expert. I explained a little bit. Interesting, this person who doesn't go to church, top professional person, he said, I know exactly what you mean. And I've been in those situations. And we have a God who transforms. And we need to be involved in that ministry. We just saw an incredibly powerful video to start today off which spoke about climate change. And later on today, we're going to get into that. God is a God of history who has always been about societal transformation. Climate change, homelessness, child poverty, living wage, refugees. God through history is the God of history who changes things. And part of our responses as churches, we need to be part of those things, and to release the transforming power of God, the resurrection power of God in these places. And the worry is, I think, in all these areas, and all of them are important, in all these areas, we've just lost confidence. We've just lost confidence. And I tell this story all the time. I've probably told it at the synod 3 times before, but that's the apostolic tradition. Charles Spurgeon, great preacher, would preach to tens of thousands of people. People would respond, would come to the fullness of life and faith. They would respond in droves. Hundreds of people would respond when he preaches. Young fella comes up to him and says, "Oh, Mr. Spurgeon, how come when you preach, people, kind of respond, and when I preach, it doesn't seem to have the same impact?" And he says, "Well, you don't really expect that every time you preach that people will come to faith, do you?" He says, "Well, no, of course not." He says, "That's the difference." That's the difference. Is that we are the people who need to expect the resurrection of Jesus to be a lived reality today. And as a church, we need to be known by that. As a church, if God doesn't turn up, we should be going into the night. We should be based upon the fact of the miraculous transformational power of God, and if he doesn't turn up, we go into the night. Because we shouldn't exist by our structures holding us together if God is not transforming around us and through us regularly. Years ago, I heard this great story with this. You've probably all been in this context where this business guy went to was on a vestry probably, and sat down at the vestry meeting and slammed his hand on the desk, and "This is a debacle. If I ran my business like this, we'd be bankrupt in 2 months." And then this old lady said, "Oh, it's funny, the church has been around for 2,000 years. How long has your business been around?" But that's not because of the structures. That's because the miraculous God inhabits the church and helps us to transform those around us. And going forward, as we head into next year and into the future, can I encourage us all to be expectant, to step out? Nobody will get healed if we don't actually pray sometimes. Climate change will not actually be turned around if we don't actually step out. Nobody will come to know the name of Jesus unless somebody goes to them and tells them. And it all starts with people stepping out and God's church stepping out. Now, somebody said to me, "You're the bishop, you don't do adverts, you do instructions." Lenten studies next year. This year's Lenten studies, we did generous hospitality, and that we had an amazing time together on our Lenten studies. Next year's Lenten studies is our transforming God, reclaiming this holistic transformation that is so apparent as a broad church. Okay, so can I encourage you to join in the Lenten studies? They're on your desk. Second thing is this. Jendy's already talked about this, but we are encouraging families and others to attend New Wine, those who can. Now, New Wine is obviously particularly focused on helping the church remember the charismatic gifts, and that's fine. We need to do that. It's not the only thing we need to do, but actually we do need to do that. And so can I encourage you, for those of you who have never been to New Wine, can I encourage you to think about it, especially families. It is just a really good time for kids linking together. So again, if you've never been to New Wine, it is clearly about encouraging the charismatic gifts amongst us. And so for some of us, that's like, wow, that's uncomfortable and I don't even know what I think about that. And that's fine. But for others, it's actually probably good for us to remember that and to re-engage with that. So can I encourage us? Okay, questions on the screen. Go. In groups of 4 with people from different parishes. What might it look like for you to remember that God transforms? Second question, what might God be inviting you to do? Groups of 4, this is only the first part. There are some more questions coming up later on. Only first instalment. Go for it. Second orientation moving forward. First orientation is reclaiming and having confidence in the resurrection of Jesus and our God is a transforming God who has continued to transform. Second thing, earlier this year, Simon Wynn, are you here, Simon? Simon Wynn set me up. And it was the festival, Wellington Festival, International Festival, and there was a writers' week. And somehow Simon set me up that I ended up on this panel discussion as a writer. It's not my major forte, but there is a book which has mine and Jenny's name on it, I know. So I ended up in this panel discussion around leadership. And there was 3 on the panel. There was me, and there was Mei Chen, and there was this other person who I can't remember, which is exactly what the panel discussion was like. It was really Mei Chen on steroids. It was just amazing. I'd never really met her before, and we're on this panel discussion about leadership. And I'm just sitting there on this panel, and suddenly it starts off, and like she's just bolted out the gate. And I'm just looking around thinking, oh my goodness, if I don't bring my A game here, I might as well go and hop off the stage and sit in the audience at this point. And it was, she was absolutely amazing. But I tell you what, as I sat there and tried to contribute meaningfully to this conversation, I listened to what she was saying. And her whole thing is around super diversity in New Zealand. And I just suddenly thought, oh my goodness, we need to move fast. New Zealand is only moving one direction in the relationship to being multicultural. And we as a diocese need to move fast. I've pulled up some stats just to give you an idea really and this is I think stats from New Zealand. So there's 260 people in the room, so I need your help here. So if our diocese was truly representative of New Zealand at this moment, this is what it would look like. So there's 260 people in the room. So could I ask back 3 tables, there's about 10 people on each table. Can back 3 tables somewhere over there stand up? So I need 3 tables at the back. There should be about 10 on each table. Okay. And that's great. And maybe just half another table stand up. Okay, great. All right, that's the Māori population in New Zealand at the moment. Okay, let's go over here. Can we have maybe, Mike, your table stand up and your table stand up? Okay, and there's a few people missing, so let's chuck in new people standing around the side. Can you guys all stand up? Great. That's the Asian population at the moment in New Zealand. And then let's have this table stand up. And next table stand up. Okay, that at the moment is the Polynesian Pacific part of New Zealand at the moment. Now, if you look at all these people and you look at our diocese, this is at the moment. Okay? If we extrapolate, this was 2006. So if we go forward to 2026, which is only 10 years from now, but the census was 2006, if we go forward to what they extrapolate for 2026, could another half table at the back stand up? Great, brilliant, rest of you stand up, that's great. So Māori would make up about 4 tables by that point. Now, over this side, we need another whole table and a half, so maybe your table stand up. And could we maybe, let's go to you fellas, you guys, you're a bit over half a table, that's right, you guys stand up, great. And then you fellas get another whole half table, so maybe, yep, You fellas stand up? Great. Brilliant. That's in 10 years' time. And it's only moving one direction. And you can see as a diocese how out of tune we are with what's happening in New Zealand. Okay? Because if we were truly a church of our communities, we would reflect this. Have a seat. So here's a few thoughts. We have to grasp the nettle. We have to move beyond being predominantly a monocultural church. Okay? And we need to relatively move fast. Okay? And the challenge is I recognise that we already are in a season of change, as we talked about yesterday, and there's already difficulty from changing. And I'm just signalling also that going forward, it's going to get more complex. Because it's actually going to get more uncomfortable. Because actually, in order for us to address and truly be the church of the communities that we find ourselves in, we actually going to have to really step out and really get messy. And that's going to be uncomfortable for us. And we're going to have to make the spaces. We're going to have to be the ones who say, hey, I don't need it to be done my way. I'm instead going to live that radical, generous hospitality that we've talked about this year. And, some of us who are leaders, lay and ordained, maybe the best things going forward is not always that, we retain the people of diversity amongst our congregations. Maybe they need their own congregations to fully flourish. And, some of us as leaders are going to find that hard. We're going to say, oh, help, I want to hold on to my flock, as opposed to see the flock grow into its own right and own beauty of its own expression of diversity and the own expression of what God would want them to be. And that's going to be hard for us. But if we don't go on the journey, we're going to be more and more marginalised, and more we're just not going to be where God's Spirit is working. And so I'm just letting us know this is going to be challenging for us, and it's actually doubly challenging because on this journey, very few of us are experienced. And so we're going to make more mistakes than normal. I mean, we make mistakes already, but we're going to make more mistakes than normal because actually we're going to have to learn a whole lot along the way. And so we're going to need more grace with each other, because in order to go in this direction, we're going to need to put resource in this direction. We're going to need to take some punts in that way and take some risks in that way. And it's going to be more messy and more mistakes will be made than normal. However, we want to be part of a church that reflects our community because every person in our community is precious to Jesus. And so we just have to live in that space. And so going forward, as a diocese, we're going to sort of orientate more resource and try to be more strategic that way. And we will make lots of mistakes. We'll try to get as much advice as we can, as much wisdom as we can. However, we're going to make lots of mistakes. Questions? Okay, groups of 4. What would a multicultural diocese look like? What can you do to help our diocese / parish more fully reflect the cultural diversity of the communities that we live in? And then once you've answered those 2 questions, pray for each other. Go for it.